Hello and festive greetings to this week's travel show with John Guinn on ukhealthradio.com. I have a couple of guests on this week's show, but before we go on any further, strikes. At the time of recording, the baggage handler strike and ground crew strike at UK airports has been called off. But there was loads of advice going around in the media, as you would expect, about what you should and shouldn't do in case this did happen. And even Ryanair got on it by saying that if it did happen, they would just encourage everybody to fly just with hand luggage. There's one thing to remember, that even if there is a strike with baggage handlers, the security rules on hand luggage will not change. So Christmas presents which will fall foul of the liquids law or the safety of passengers rules won't be allowed on board as hand luggage. So it's immaterial now because the strike's been called off, but this is just for future reference. If you can't use the checked baggage system, then you're not automatically allowed to take dangerous items or loads of liquids on board as hand luggage. I didn't hear anybody mention that when they suggested by going hand luggage only, but I just thought I'd get that out of the way first. Anyway, back to the serious bits and pieces. Later in the show, I'll be speaking to Daniel Turner, who's Associate Director of Tourism and EU Compliance at the Born Free Foundation. We'll be talking about Thomas Cook's recent announcement about its animal welfare policy. So we'll be finding out about what that policy is and how Born Free are working with Thomas Cook and how Born Free look out for the welfare of animals in general. But my first guest, he's back on again, is Adam Mortimer, a consumer advisor from the UK ECC, the European Consumer Centre. We're talking about consumer rights again. They've just released their report for 2015, so we're going to be talking about the numbers and what sort of problems they face from consumers. Well, not from the consumers, but from what the suppliers cause the consumers to make them complain in the first place. So the first thing we're going to be talking about with Adam is the increase in numbers of complaints about hotels and villas. And we're going to find out why people were complaining.
When we talk about villas and the hotels, that doesn't take into account the timeshares and stuff like that. So we dealt with in the region of about 300. 50 of those were against UK traders. So it sounds like quite a low number, but actually that's quite a lot in proportion to the type of cases that we deal with in this area.
It also seems a lot to the people who have been affected by it as well, doesn't it? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you try telling that to someone that's been in that position. They're in a holiday scenario usually, and that one case is, although it doesn't seem a lot, actually it usually ends up with quite a bit of detriment to that person.
So, what sort of complaints were you dealing with?
Well, when you talk about holidays, villas and hotels, you immediately think no booking there. Or if it's a villa, not returning the deposit, the breakage deposit when returning the keys. You can get the odd stuff, but generally that's what you're looking at. You're booking through an agent, and booked it right, or something has gone wrong whilst you're there. You don't get the deposit back.
You just mentioned briefly an agent, but did you have more complaints from independent travellers than people who bought packages, or was it roughly the same?
Independent travel is obviously quite big at the moment because it's a lot cheaper in some instances in the package holiday. So package holiday complaints were quite low. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at that, most UK consumers wouldn't buy a package holiday from a cross-border company, someone in the EU. Generally, your package holiday is bought from another UK tour operator. So, that there may be more package holiday complaints, but not that come through our service. And we actually categorise package holiday differently within our system, so it doesn't come under the villas and hotels. But yes, they were a lot lower for that reason.
Do the consumer rights differ between those who book independently and those who use a travel agent or a tour company?
The EU directives that are out there, they give a base protection, which we call minimum harmonisation, and that is a blanket coverage across all of the EU member countries. So you may find that a different country may give you more rights than what that minimum harmonisation is, but the fundamental rights are the same everywhere. The only main difference is that package travel has got its own legislation, whereas individual bookings rely on the type of problem that you may have. It might fall under, in the UK, sort of the Consumer Rights Act or the Old Seller Goods Act, or it may just be a straightforward breach of contract. It really does depend on the situation.
You said there's a minimum level, but some countries offer more enhancements. How easy is it to find out what the enhancements are should you decide to book with a company, say, in Spain or Germany?
Not too easy, actually. I think that's a good point to make. So, the minimum harmonisation is quite good anyway. So you kind of understand, you get this blanket coverage for any purchases cross-border in the European Union. And then going from there, one prime example that I can tell you is that the limitation period for making a claim within the European Union would be a minimum period of 2 years, whereas in the UK we have a maximum period of 6. So you can see that there's some slight differences, but generally it's that minimum protection which is a good coverage anyway, and you might find that some countries have their own legislation which has a bit more, but we can obviously help with that. But I think before you go, you're not really going to necessarily need that information, I don't think.
So we don't need that information, but do you have any advice for people before they book, and if they do experience a problem once they're away?
Yeah, I've got a few points here, and I think the first one I can think of is find out who you're buying from. Look on their website, see if they've got an address. Now, it doesn't matter if they're based in another European country. It just helps you, if you have a complaint afterwards, to know who you're dealing with. Have a look for memberships of such bodies like ABTA, or are they bonded by an atoll? Those things, that added protection in the event of a problem can really be a help and a good starting block for you to get what you need to. Could also use a credit card. I'm sure you've talked about Section 75 before, and it is a good way to resolve the problem if you've got difficulty resolving it with the trader. Language barrier, you might find that they just don't respond, go out of business, and that credit card protection does really help you in that situation.
Yes, I know somebody who used Section 75 when they had a complaint and they booked independently, and it soon got the company coming around to answer their emails. It does work. You're listening to The Travel Show with John Guinn on UKHealthRadio.com. Still to come on the show, there'll be travel news, and as it seems to be quite common at the moment, I'm going to be having an Airbnb story, but not just the one, not two, but 3 stories about the sharing website. And before that, we'll be finding out about Thomas Cook's new animal welfare policy, what they're doing, how they're looking out for animals, and how they're working with people such as the Born Free Foundation. Before that, I'm going to continue with my conversation with Adam Mortimer, a consumer advisor at the UK European Consumer Centre. We're talking about the complaints they've had to deal with, and we've moved on from hotels and villas. We're now moving on to problems when people have been using transport. Your report also said that you've seen an increase in transport complaints. How many assistant complaints did you deal with, and how did that compare to the previous year?
When we talk about an assistance complaint, that's one of the complaints that we actually get involved in. So we do twofold at our office. We advise consumers on a complaint, and then if they need assistance, where maybe contacting the company or assistance in contacting an alternative dispute resolution body, that's what we can get involved in with our counterpart offices. So we assisted 350 UK consumers in 2015 with transport, and we dealt with 420 cases against UK traders. Now, the UK consumers have a multitude of transport issues, car hire, airlines, they all bring their own particular complaints. But against the UK traders, generally you've got some big airlines in the UK, so that owes to that figure, I think.
So there's plenty of different ways to travel, and we have spoken about this briefly a few weeks ago, but how could people find out about their rights no matter how they travel?
There's lots of avenues to find advice. Now, if you find yourself in the position where you've got a delay or a denied boarding or cancellation at the airport, airlines have to advise you of your rights there. So you usually get a slip, or you might find a poster on the wall or something like that. Through organisations such as ourselves or Citizens Advice, we always give advice to people if they find themselves in a complaint. And the internet is obviously full of information, loads. You've got Money Saving Expert, which they're all giving information on such a hot topic. Lots of people travel, so it's when something does inevitably go wrong, there's lots of avenues to sort of point you in the right direction. It's really good, actually.
Got another example. I was at Luton Airport yesterday, and an EasyJet flight was delayed by 4 hours, or just over 4 hours. But after a few hours, they did actually make an announcement and start giving out vouchers. But that was good, but a lot of people weren't sure what was going on before the announcement was made. So although it was good and an announcement was made, here are your rights, it was slow coming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you can understand, sometimes they're waiting to know themselves, if there's a part that's gone wrong on the plane, or they're waiting for more staff, they don't know. And, sometimes more information is better, but, sometimes if they'd rather give good information, I guess. It's different for every scenario. If they know that something's going wrong, I'd like to think that generally they are telling people the right thing at the right time. But, it's good that they've given out the vouchers and gone about it the right way.
There's another story involving Ryanair, I think last year or the year before. I'm getting old now, so all the years blur into one. But they had to land at the wrong Canary Island because of weather, and they tried their best to contact everybody once they landed to say what they were going to do. But so many people just ran out of the airport in a panic. They couldn't be contacted, so it's good to, whatever it is, just always speak to your airline, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we always talk about travel because there's a travel show, but you deal with other consumer complaints as well. What other consumer issues have you been dealing with?
Obviously, certainly this time of year, online purchases, and then going into the January and February months, we do a lot about that. A lot of people purchase online these days for Christmas presents or other gifts, and with big companies based in the EU, it makes sense that we see a lot of footfall with that. But that's big companies, obviously thousands upon sales, do generate complaints, whether they're rightly done or not. So we do see a lot of that. It's hard to get away from the transport side of things and the accommodation side of things. That is a big part of what we do, and the way that it's more publicised, more people come to you because of those than the others. So we like to publicise about the other rights that people have, and